down a lot because of significant losses. They had to recover their battle capacity and to bring additional troops and weapons to Ukraine. In Donetsk area, the enemy has been trying to carry out offensive operation, continuing attempts to encircle units of the joint forces to reach the administrative boundary of Donetsk and Luhansk provinces. The enemy has been focusing key efforts on attempts to take such towns as Popasna and Drubizhne and preparations for assault on Severodonetsk. Around Avdiivka, the enemy carried out some assault actions and tried to move towards Novobakhmutivka, but to no success. Also, the units of the Ukrainian defense forces resisted the enemy's attack in the village Mayorsky and their attack towards Krasnogorivka. In Slobozhanщина direction, the key efforts of Russian units have been focused on strengthening and keeping the positions they took previously. The enemy has also been firing against infrastructure and military defense facilities in cities of Kharkiv and Chuguyev. In Volyn direction, the enemy did not do any offensive action. At the same time, units of the Republic of Belarus have been brought from their permanent locations to training exercise areas. In Polisia, the enemy continues firing against towns and villages without active offensive attempts. In Siversk direction, the enemy did not attack, did not carry out any offensive action, and concentrated their efforts on maintaining their positions previously taken. And in some areas, they withdrew with significant losses. In Tavria direction, the enemy continued to strengthen their control over temporarily occupied territories and carried out some filtration actions, tried to implement strict administrative and policing regime. Ukrainian defense forces focused their efforts on preventing the enemy from moving towards the city of Kryvyi Rih, city of Zaporizhia, and on defense of city of Mykolaiv. Ukrainian forces keep significant parts of sea coast defended and defend the critical infrastructure facilities. In southern Bug direction, the enemy fortified their positions, did engineering fortification work and artillery shelling on some Ukrainian units. Also, Ukrainian defense forces have been defending the naval bases in Black Sea operational area. According to Ukrainian reconnaissance, Ukrainian intelligence, the invaders try to replenish for their losses using the equipment they take from storage. In particular, in Klimovo, in Bryansk province, which is 35 kilometers with the Ukrainian border, the enemy has been deploying the repair and restoration base, and they have been trying to put into operation a large number of equipment taken from storage, and most of this equipment has been in a really bad situation, which makes it impossible to use it to the full scale. Generally, Russian Federation always runs into a problem of being unable to restore the operational capacity of the equipment after conservation storage. Mostly optical devices and electronics which contain precious metals has been stolen from that equipment. For example, in 4th Tank Division of Russian Armed Forces, it turned out that out of 10 tanks taken from storage, just one is in more or less operable condition. The rest of those tanks has completely lost their parts. Some of them don't even have engines. And currently, the plans to transport to the combat area the equipment taken from storage have failed. Also, the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine has obtained the list of personnel of the battalion tactical group from the 37th Separate Infantry Brigade from Kyakhta in Republic of Buryatia, who have been committing war crimes against Ukrainian people. To your attention, the total combat losses of Russian armed forces who invaded Ukraine since 24th of February to 26th of March. So those approximate losses are as follows. manpower, about 16,400 people who died, 575 tanks, 1,640 armored fighting vehicles, 293 artillery systems, 91 multiple launch rocket systems, 51 air defense systems, 117 aircraft, 127 helicopters, 1,131 vehicles, 7 ships and boats, tactical level UAVs, 56 of those, special equipment, 19 units, and 2 launch vehicles. It's difficult to calculate the losses because of high intensity of combat action, so those data have been adjusted all the time. Now that's all information I'll have at the moment. Thank you for attention. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to heroes. Thank you, Oleksandr. And now you're welcome with your questions, if any. Please speak into the microphone.
Lorenzo Cremonesi for the Italian daily Corriere della Sera. Sir, 2 questions. Can you confirm that somehow, after the Russian announcement yesterday, the Russians are withdrawing, or in any case not attacking Kyiv, they're leaving the capital and they're concentrating on Donbass? And secondly, could you confirm that in the Kherson area, your troops are reinitiating, are attacking, there are new military activity, and the city is not in total control by the Russians? Thank you very much.
Дякую.
Thank you. We have been monitoring the situation very carefully, and we have also heard that press briefing by Russian armed forces. What we can say here, one thing we can say is this: because Russian Federation has incurred huge losses, Russian armed forces have incurred huge losses in terms of both manpower and equipment. And since so-called Blitzkrieg, fast successful war, a victorious war of Russian Federation in Ukraine has failed, Russian leadership tries to adjust somehow, to make certain adjustments to this so-called special operation, which is actually a full-fledged war against our country. At the same time, at the moment, we still cannot exclude attempts and preparations by the Russian military to either take or besiege the most important administrative centers in Ukraine. So we have been monitoring the situation, and we cannot fully exclude such attempts by Russian Federation, so we should be ready for any developments in this situation. Thank you. More questions?
Very, very precise. Just can you confirm that somehow in the last less than 24 hours, the Russians are diminishing, are reducing the pressure on the capital, which was the main subject of their announcement yesterday? They said clearly that they consider the mission to the operation against Kyiv more or less a success, and they're now withdrawing. They're not pressing on that. Can you confirm there is a less pressure from the Russian on the Kyiv area? And again, Kherson, can you tell us a little more about Kherson? Is it true that you are regaining some part of the area of Kherson? Thank you. Sorry, I insist because I didn't get a specific answer. Thank you.
Yes, I got your question. I can tell you one thing. Take into account huge amount of misinformation coming from Russian Federation. We cannot trust them. Now, about city of Kyiv, the capital city. At the moment, we don't see any withdrawal of Russian troops from certain areas. The other way around, in some areas, armed forces of Ukraine carry out successful operations in certain areas, and as I said in previous briefings, in some areas the enemy has been pushed back from Kyiv for more than 70 kilometers. In some areas, the units of Russian armed forces are at 35 kilometers from Kyiv. Obviously, the leadership of Russia understands that in order to take the capital of Ukraine, they need a huge amount of manpower, of personnel and equipment, and at the moment Russia cannot have it. So at the same time, we cannot reduce the defense capacity of Kyiv. Kyiv has been strengthening, fortifying. The capital city has been defended well by our military units of the armed forces of Ukraine and other components of defense force, so we are ready for any developments. Now about Kherson. I am not to comment here. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome.
I'm a reporter from Zing New. I'm from Vietnam, and I have two questions for you. The first question is, what are you doing to protect people, civilian? Since many places in Kyiv have become targets now. And the second question is, how do you see the participation of the people with the army? And what would you say with the Ukrainians around the world? Thank you.
Повторіть, будь ласка, своє друге.
Could you please repeat your second question?
Repeat the second question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second question is, how do you see the participation of the people with the army, Ukraine army, I mean, and what would you say with the Ukrainians around the world?
Please repeat. Перекладач.
Я зрозумів.
Уточніть, будь ласка, запитання.
Could you please clarify your question? So what would you say to Ukrainians who are in other territories around the world, or what? All across the world, or what? What?
Стосовно вашого першого запитання.
Regarding your first question, I can say this. The armed forces of Ukraine, as well as other defense components, defense units, are always with the people. Ukrainian army, Ukrainian forces always help civilians, not only in the capital city, but also in other places where Ukrainian citizens, unfortunately, suffer from crimes by Russian military. We know about people who died. We know about criminal shelling of the city of Mariupol, where women die, children die, elder people die. But the armed forces of Ukraine always help, always come to help people. We are also talking about comprehensive support. We are talking about medical assistance to lay people. On your second question, I can tell you that currently, to defend Ukraine, the Ukrainians, not only from Ukraine, but from the whole world, have joined their efforts. And currently we see a lot of Ukrainian citizens are coming back to Ukraine in order to join the ranks of defenders of Ukraine. We have managed to successfully carry out the mobilization, and now we are in the second stage of mobilization. We have brought additional reserves of more than 100,000 people. We have been actively forming, we have formed and continue forming territorial defense forces. I would like to remind you that territorial defense forces are separate force within the armed forces of Ukraine. They are part of the armed forces of Ukraine. Currently, the whole country has joint efforts against the aggressor, because Russia has their plans about destroying our country as such, and will not let it happen. So I would like to thank every Ukrainian men and women, Ukrainian men and women who have responded to the call of the leadership of Ukraine and joined the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine and other military units. And now we have been successfully defending our country and defeating the enemy in all directions. Thank you.
Questions on once of my Italian colleague regarding Kyiv, the situation to the northwest, to be precise. First of all, there was talk in some analysis pieces that I read that there's an actual chance to encircle a large number of Russian troops. Is that possible? Second question, in what I've been reading, there was also talk about Russian troops digging in, building trenches for personnel, but also digging in their machinery. How much of that are you seeing? Is that a large-scale phenomenon, and how dangerous is that for you? Does that constitute a big danger for you? If so, how? And last question, again, northwest of Kyiv. How big is the Russian battle group up there that we're talking about?
Дякую вам.
Thank you for your questions. Now, there is a lot of information on the internet, various analytical papers and conclusions. I would like to ask you to read the official information provided by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and by the leadership of our nation. Of course, the enemy, during the combat action, because they failed in their attempts to move forward in most areas, they try to keep those lines they have temporarily taken. Now the enemy has run into huge problems with logistical support. We see many cases when Russian military just drops their equipment because they run out of fuel. Also, we have cases where the Russian military surrender on a mass scale. We have confirmed cases where there is a sabotage. They ignore the orders of their commanders, and Russian soldiers try to just shell somehow all their armor towards our towns and villages, just to tell their commanders, now we don't have weapons, we don't have fuel, we don't have armor, take us from here, please. We also know of such cases, such confirmed cases. About possible encirclement of Kyiv, again, I would not like to disclose all the details of those special operations carried out by Ukrainian armed forces, but I can emphasize that the Ukrainian army is not only defending. In many areas, in many directions, and in many areas of operations, there is a counteroffensive action by armed forces of Ukraine, and they push back the enemy successfully. Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you, Oleksandr. If no more questions, more question?
Do need to follow up on the question of digging in, asking how, are you seeing on a large scale Russian troops close to Kyiv digging in themselves and their machinery? If so, how dangerous is that for defending there?
What do you mean? Why is it dangerous? Of course, the enemy is forced now to try and keep their lines that they dig in with their equipment. That's logical, because they are afraid of strikes of our aviation. They are afraid of being fired, being shooted from Ukrainian UAVs. They are afraid of our artillery. So they try to hide, to dig their equipment. That's completely, nothing strange there and nothing terrible here. I'd like to reassure you that Ukrainian armed forces will finally push back the enemy, push away the enemy.
You mentioned before the fact that Russians were surrendering. Can you, before you were very detailed in giving us the losses, the number of the deaths, of the tanks, of the equipment they lost. Do you have an idea how many prisoners you have? How many Russian prisoners are in your hands? And, if I may, can you give us also a number of your prisoners? How many Ukrainian soldiers are in Russian hands? Thank you.
similar information. That sort of information is not within my competence. I can only say that those Russian soldiers who surrender, who become our prisoners of war, they're transferred to the law enforcement agencies of Ukraine, and then those carry out investigation on them. Several days ago, there was information that about 500 Russian military being captured by us. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you and goodbye. You monitor our announcements. Now we are developing the schedule of our broadcast, so please stay with us. Thank you and thank many.